So one of the final steps that we take in the process of putting together this comprehensive program is to engage in program evaluation. Um, this should be an ongoing process. Every activity that you do should have some type of evaluation method built into it so that you can determine whether what you've done has been effective or not. You don't have to evaluate your entire program every year. If you remember back in one of the earlier lectures, it gave you kind of a 3-year cycle for evaluating, so that you would pick a certain aspect of your program to evaluate each year. If you had to evaluate the whole thing, it would be pretty comprehensive and a little bit overwhelming. So that you identify what's going to be evaluated each year. So let's just talk a little bit about some myths about program evaluation. The first is that it's this extraneous activity that you just get a whole lot of data and that they don't really give you any useful conclusions. You don't want to be gathering data just for the purpose of gathering data. You want to be gathering meaningful data so that it tells you whether what you're doing is effective or not. If you can't draw any useful conclusions from it, you're not looking at the right data, or you're not looking at it in the right way. So evaluation is not about proving the success or failure of your program. It's about looking at the level of effectiveness that you have achieved. It may mean that it shows you've had overwhelming success, but it may also mean that there's a part of it that you're looking at that needs to be tweaked. Also, it's a myth that evaluation is this really complex process that you have to do in a very specific way at a very specific time. And that's not true either. Like I said earlier, evaluation is an ongoing process. And it can be done formally, it can be done informally. But however it is you're doing it, you need to have, even if it's informally, you need to have some type of documentation of what you've done and what conclusions you can draw from it. So evaluation helps us by, as I've said several times, giving us information on the impact of our services. Is what we are doing effective? It improves our delivery mechanisms so that we can be more effective and more efficient. You can certainly see this sometimes in your process data, that when you're looking at how many people are being served or how much time a counselor is spending on certain activities. It's the ability to verify that we're doing what we think we're doing. It helps to kind of make us think about our program. We have to go through an annual evaluation of the counselor education program every year. And as much as I kind of dread the process of doing it, every time when I'm in the middle of it, I find interesting information there. And sometimes the information, like I said, supports that, wow, we've done a really good job in this area. But sometimes it brings out some information that we had not thought about. An example I can give you of that is in the professional orientation class. You guys have two assignments in there that we use as a part of our assessment system. One of them is the not professional orientation, your theory, your professional theory paper. I can't remember. That's not what it's called. It's the paper that you write. Your philosophy. That's what it is. It's your professional philosophy paper. And then the other one is the advocacy letter that you have to write. Well, when we started looking at the data that we had collected on that, we saw that the writing on the philosophy paper was really good. You guys had good scores on that. But the writing on the advocacy letter was not good at all. There was a vast difference in the writing scores on both of those. So what it helped us to see was you guys were doing a good job of writing from that research paper standpoint, but you didn't know how to write a professional letter. So we went in and we added in a module on how to write a professional letter. And once we did that, we saw that our scores came up in the writing area of that. So that's an example of how that annual evaluation helped us to improve the educational offerings and the way that we were teaching certain things. So it also helps you to facilitate thinking about what the program is really all about. You know, what is it that we value? What is it that we're assessing, and why is that important to us? You can use that data to promote your program, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about in the next module, is how to market your program, and I'm going to show you some ways to do that. But then it also provides information needed for replication. So when we go back and we look at our annual data each year, we see, you know what, we've got 4 years now of this data to say that students are mastering these objectives at this level. So what we're doing is working. So obviously we would want to keep on doing that. So we're going to talk about 3 types of evaluation. The first one is the personnel evaluation. That's the school counselor's evaluation. The second one is the program evaluation. That is a formative assessment, and so you would look at that to determine to what degree is the program being implemented and how can the program be improved. So if you look at this plan that you have, and you see on that summary table that we had in the last module, it said, you know, certain things were going to happen at certain times. So if you were going to go back and look at that program evaluation, you can say, we said we were going to do these classroom guidance lessons in September and October. Did we do them? And, you know, if not, if we didn't do them, what are the things that we need to do to ensure that we're doing that? And that may go back to looking at your annual calendar, ensuring that your annual calendar is implemented, and putting in some accountability measures in there to ensure that it is. Program evaluation, the way that some of this is, it could also be, that could also be process data. So you're looking at how many students participated in small group activities, how many classroom guidance lessons were taught, how many parent education sessions were held. Results evaluation is going to be your outcome data. So that's looking at the data that determines, did you achieve the goals that you set? You know, if the goal is related to academic achievement, did you achieve whatever it was, the goals that you set in there? Okay, so when we look at the evaluation of the professional school counselor, you should have some type of performance improvement system. And in that, it defines what your job responsibilities are. It determines who is your professional supervisor. There's a fair performance evaluation that is completed on an annual basis, and then it sets goals for professional development. Something that I just recently found out, it is actually in Texas law that every employee in a school district has to be evaluated every 15 months. And if you're not supposed to get a check. So I'm thinking if we were withholding checks, people might be asking to be evaluated. To be perfectly honest, there are a lot of settings in which counselors are not being evaluated. And as a counselor, that's something you need to be advocating for. If you're not being evaluated on a regular basis, you need to be having a conversation with your supervisor about ensuring that that's getting done. That fair performance evaluation also means that you're being evaluated based upon your job description. I know counselors who are getting evaluated on the same system that a teacher is. And that's not an appropriate evaluation because that's not what you're doing. So this evaluation then would have some type of summative inclusion of counselor effectiveness, which that should go back to your program goals. Are you achieving what you said you were setting out to do? Uh, if you're looking at setting your own professional goals, so if I set goals for this year, for next year, when I'm evaluated next year, we should be going back and looking to see, did I achieve the goals that I set out to? And then there should be some type of systematic method of objectively measuring your performance, not subjectively, but objectively. And then this, anytime we're evaluated, it helps assist with continuous improvement. I had a conversation with a colleague the other day, and she was upset because she had gotten a 4 out of 5 on her overall evaluation. And obviously, she has pretty high standards for herself if she was upset about a 4, because a lot of people be happy with 4. And so we had the conversation about, if you, she's fairly young. She's a professor and she's fairly young in the field. And we had a conversation about, if you have 4s right now, where do you have to go? How do you document improvement? I'm sorry, if she'd had 5 right now, if her score had been all 5s right now, then how does she set herself up for improvement? And in reality, there's probably not any of us that don't have some room for improvement. And our evaluation should reflect that. Okay, so when we're looking at how do you go about evaluating a school counselor, there's 3 things. A lot of times, and I have had administrators who use this before, that the first thing they asked me to do was to engage in a self-evaluation. And the reason that this is important for a school counselor is because there's a lot of what you do that can't be observed. It's not like the principal is going to come sit in your classroom and watch you teach like he does the teachers. Now, he may observe a classroom guidance lesson, but there's so much more to your job than a classroom guidance lesson. So that you would take whatever that instrument is that you're being assessed on. And Texas does have an instrument. It's called the TEMPSCE-2. That's TEMPSCE, a Texas Evaluation Method for Professional School Counselors is what that stands for. And so I would complete that and kind of, provide them evidence of why I rated myself in the way that I did. And then the principal would then look over that, gather, the evidence that he had as well, do his administrative evaluation. And then we would look at how well I did in attaining my goals that I had set for myself. So the steps that you use, it's your data collection, look at the analysis, you write up some type of draft or form of it. Then there is an evaluation conference between the counselor and her supervisor or his supervisor. Then there is kind of a post-evaluation conference analysis, and then you complete the form itself. So now we're going to look at program evaluation. There are different ways to do this. If you want to choose an audit, ASCA has a program audit. I kind of think that this number that I have on here is from the old ASCA model. We're in the 3rd edition now, and I think that page number is from the 2nd edition. I've got my current edition here. Let me look at it. I don't think that... no, the audit form is not in here any longer, but I'm sure it's available from ASCA. The state of Utah, if you have a copy of the PowerPoint, I'm not going to click on it for during the recording, but if you have a copy of the PowerPoint and you click on the state of Utah, they have a form that they use as a state. Okay, the self-study review would be basically that you would just look at your program, you would go through your program, and it would be that summary table that we'd set, your curriculum crosswalk, and you would go through and do that review yourself and look at the data that you've collected. And then an external review would be if you had somebody come in from the outside to just kind of have some fresh eyes and somebody that may be a little bit more objective than we are. With this self-study review here, you can also include your advisory council on that. And there'll be a little bit more information about an advisory council in the module here. Okay, so your results evaluation, you're going to collect some data. You're going to look at your action plans. You may want to look at student achievement data, at behavior, attendance, all that data that we've talked about throughout the course. You want to look at pre and post comparisons, some perception data, and then checklists that are used in an advisory program. This also is not the right page. That's from a previous textbook there. So, and then you also need to be sure that you are collecting data in each domain. So this is responsive services, individual planning, guidance curriculum, and system support. So you want to pull all of that up. When you look at your data, you want to be sure that you are disaggregating data. Disaggregating data means that you're pulling it apart. You're looking at it by different subpopulations. And that subpopulation can be based on ethnic groups. It can be based upon different subpopulations within your school, like special ed, at risk, ELL. It can be grade levels. You could have, looking at the difference between your different grade levels. If you were looking at process data, you might want to look at, are you providing as many services to your 9th and 10th graders as you are your 11th and 12th graders. Sometimes those 12th graders especially can suck up a lot of your time as they're preparing for college applications and financial aid and scholarship applications. So that would give you a way to look at that. If you just looked at services across the board there, you might go, wow, I'm doing a lot, across the board. But when you break it down by grade level, you may see that, let's say 10th grade isn't getting a whole lot of attention. So you want to be sure that you don't just look at aggregate data, that you look at disaggregated data. Use spreadsheets to collect your data. If you do not have a good understanding of Excel, I really encourage you either to take, some type of class that you could take on how to use Excel, get a book on how to use Excel. Excel can be your best friend as a school counselor. Not only does it do a great job of organizing information, but it also can do some of your basic statistical analysis, and then it can create charts and graphs for you within that. My daughter is a research scientist, and she uses Excel to do almost all of her statistical analysis of the data that she collects in the lab. And then your results evaluation report. And this is what we'll be working on in the next module that we'll be looking at marketing your program. So you use this to communicate to others what you've done. When in doing this, you need to determine who your audience is. If it's a technical report, it's going to be people who understand at the level that you do. So it's going to provide your program description, your evaluation design, how you went about collecting data, what the data was, what the results were, and then conclusions, discussions, and recommendations. Most of the time, you'll do some type of professional report or some type of report card. And those are going to be things that just about anybody could understand. This URL here is a 2-hour webinar on how to develop school report card, and it's based out of California. They have something that's called the Spark, and that's school personnel um, annual report card. I think that's it. It's SPARC, and I'm going to show you some examples of that in the next module as well when we're talking about how to market. So for this module, I'm going to give you some data and some information, and I'm going to want you to look at that data, evaluate it, and then you're going to draw some conclusions from the data. So we'll put that out there for you, and you can look at it, and then that will be your program evaluation data. Or I'm sorry, your program evaluation assignment, and that'll be explained more in the module.